Hello and welcome back to the Redwood Violin, and I'm going to tell you about what I've been doing in the workshop this week. So the rib structure, or the sides of the violin, are already done, and this week I started on making the back and the top. And this is where I first really start getting acquainted with the redwood and the applewood that I'm using, and getting a sense of what their tonal potential is. And I'm going to be making decisions about the shape of the arching in the back and the top, and those that's one of the ways in which it can make the most of that potential. So the other thing I've been doing is I'm almost out of the tendon glue, and so I've started a new batch of tendon glue, and I'll show you some of that process too. Just want to show you some of the tools that I use for carving the plates. I've got this German wooden plane that I got on eBay and reshaped with a curved sole, and use that for the rough work. To adjust it, you use a hammer, move the blade side to side, and to move it out, hit the back. This is a smaller version of the same thing, a little plane that I made out of ebony for finer work. And then when it gets finer still, I use these little violin maker's thumb planes. Same thing again, they've got a rounded sole. Thicknessing caliper mostly gets used in the next stage of making the plates, thinning them out, but also use it at this stage to measure the height in the middle of the arch. This is a lovely tool from Japan. A Japanese friend bought it for me. He said it came from like a third generation family who made nothing but these. It's beautifully made. I use this for marking out the edge of the instrument. Another Japanese tool, kiri drill, which I'll use for making little locating pins for the plates. Gouges that have been refit with long handles. It just makes the gouging a lot easier. Very flat one for the outside and a curved one for hollowing the plate out. And finally, cabinet scrapers. These have a little burr on them on the edge, and they'll actually remove material. So I have two. I've got a flexible one and a stiff one, and these are used for shaping, this one in particular, and finish work. And with these you don't need any sandpaper. Let's start by taking the outline of the instrument from the ribs. So I'm drawing a line offset from the rib line, and the finished instrument will have an overhang where the plates meet the ribs. After sawing out the plate on the bandsaw, I mark the edge thickness. I don't just mark it, I actually cut in about 3 millimeters. And now I start carving the plates, using my scrub plane to take wood off of the edges. Check for symmetry. Some off the ends, working down to those cut lines, and then blending the ends into the edges. So I've started cutting into the redwood, and starting to get a sense of what it's like. It's very crumbly. Normally I'd expect to see more shavings than this. These are kind of short and crumbly. It's also, the wood is very light. It feels a lot lighter than I normally expect at this point. It's got a nice clear ring to it, that's nice. So I have a feeling that this wood is going to make a very responsive violin. So I'm not worried about making a a flat arch, straight out arch that's going to be very responsive. I'm thinking more about maybe making something that I think it might have a little bit of a brittle tone, and I'm thinking I'm going to go with a full arch to try and make the sound a little richer, because I think it's going to have no trouble with response and volume. So that's my thinking so far. So the applewood for the back, it's a very nice wood. It cuts well. It's leaving a nice shaving. They feel kind of dry in a way. I'm not sure how to describe that. But it leaves a very nice clean cut off an edge. It's known as a carving wood, and I can see why. My feeling is at the moment that it would make a nice warm sounding fiddle, and I think that's a good thing, because I think the top may need some controlling. So I think this is probably a good back to go with that top. So the plate roughly arched, I'm going to finalise my outline by trimming off those rough edges. But before I do that, I'm going to put in a couple of locating pins, one at each end, so that I can get the on and off of the ribs quite easily. And next I'm going to scribe my final line around the plate. There's a nail in there, sharpened nail. For your violin makers out there, I actually normally do my purfling on the box, so all of this cleaning up of the edge at this point, I'd normally be doing that at a later stage. And then trim down to those lines using a little block plane on the end grain, and a violin maker's knife in the corners and C-bats. And I'd stay away from files as much as possible, because you get more dynamic lines and more interesting curves with just a blade. To make animal glue, you need a source of collagen. Hides are the industry favourite, but I'm using beef tendons, raised on the Oak Ridge Ranch over near Calistoga and supplied to me by Soko Meats in my neighbourhood. The first thing to do is to separate the tendons from the other tissue, the muscle and the fat. And then I cut those into smaller pieces so that they would dissolve more easily. And then I cook them in a pot of water at a low temperature, under 80 degrees C, for about 72 hours, at which point the tendons are dissolved into smaller pieces, and I sieved out as many of the remnants as I could get, and then I poured the rest of the liquid through a cheesecloth. So there's my glue broth. I'm just going to let it sit at a low temperature with the lid off and let it evaporate down. Let's see how long that takes.